Can you repeat what you just said, Rebecca, before I started recording?
So I was looking at...
No, I want to hear... You got to start with that sentence you just said. It always starts with dick or something?
It starts with dick? Really? It's all about dick?
Yeah.
It all goes back to dick.
Okay, you have the audience intrigued. Now, please elaborate.
So I was looking at the course outline for my sex therapist certification, and I was surprised to see how much time... And this is obviously like not the whole course, but I was like, oh man, we're starting with dick. Wow. Like with everything that we know about female sexuality and female bodies, and I want to focus on female bodies. I was like, man, we're going to be talking about dick a lot. And that's going to be triggering for me. And I'm going to have to like chill and just think about dick. And I'm amazed at how much time gets spent on male erection dysfunction disorder or whatever you want to call it, when half of American women are having orgasms, which is way more important to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
yeah.
We'll talk more about dick as I learned.
I mean, is it like 70% of the time about dick, or is it 50?
I don't know yet. I mean, it was just the course description for one of the 8 modules.
Yeah.
So I just need to chill out. But I was also like, I guess I was like shocked of like, oh, right, this is sex therapy. And for a lot of people, when I say sex therapy, most people think I'm going to be working with heterosexual couples. And I have to explain like, that may be other people's focus, but that's not going to be my work.
Mm-hmm. And you have the luxury of saying that because you're late career, and when you start working with clients, you can actually determine that. For a lot of people starting their career, they don't have that luxury usually because they have to take whoever is going to come to them.
And I had this very sweet moment with my dad where he was asking me why I was doing this, and I was explaining, Dad, this is the last 20 years of my career, and this is how I want to spend it. And my octogenarian father said, oh, wow, that went so fast. I was like, oh, my God, you've watched my whole life. I'm talking about the last 20 years of my career.
Yeah, it is weird because in traditional sense, the traditional sense, in 10 years, we're basically of retiring age, of the old days. Mm-hmm. I don't think that many people retire in their early 60s these days. And particularly therapists, professors, podcasters don't retire then.
I can't retire, so you better keep this up.
Right. Speaking of dicks. And so...
I'll talk about dicks a lot if it keeps my career going. I'll focus my whole career. I'll just talk about dick all day long.
I mean, there's a lot of erectile dysfunction in the world, and I think it's on the rise, but I'm bumped. And
we're going to have so much fun.
Okay, so along those lines, there's an email that I asked if you wanted to tackle, and you said, I think, quote, why the fuck not?
It's all about dick anyways.
So, anonymous patron, she wrote in and says, hi, Kirk, and I was hoping to ask Rebecca this question as well. I am a heterosexual cisgender woman who has bisexual tendencies, or maybe I guess that makes me queer, ? I am not completely confident with labels or terminology around my sexuality, by the way. Recently, I had a date with a cisgendered, this person says cisgendered, but it's cisgender, pansexual woman. So what's your definition of pansexual, Rebecca?
They are attracted to all genders, pan meaning all.
Right. Because if you say bisexual, that is referring to the binary, of course.
Right.
So pansexual. Recently, I had a date with a cisgender pansexual woman who told me she is annoyed by bisexual people who won't date transgender people. Her statement caught me off guard because it seemed like a litmus test, as if she was fielding my attitudes on the topic. Right. So just chiming in, litmus test, I think meaning that it wasn't actually on the table.
I mean, I think that's a question of like, are you one of us? Like,
you think that anonymous patron might be reading that correctly?
Yeah.
Perhaps, going back to the email, perhaps out of naivete, I struggled and said, that makes sense. But honestly, so this is back to her thinking, but honestly, I had never thought about it before. The date ended on a flat note, and I was still thinking about her question, feeling a little confused. Afterwards, with some thought, I realized I wouldn't date someone trans. It seems so unfamiliar to me, particularly because trans is such a big part of one's identity. Just chiming in here, what do you think about that thus far, Rebecca?
Well, I think because I know where we're going, attraction is a complicated thing. Some people base their sexual attraction on people's minds or all kinds of aspects of people. For some people, it's really a body attraction issue. And I know this is loaded, but I personally think that has to be okay. That someone's like, there are certain aspects of a body that I want to be attracted to. I just spent the evening live streaming with Sylvia Ostafermore. We're doing these very funny Two Old Queers Who Tarot experiences on Instagram. And we were doing a reading for her friend who's gay, who's really into men who are bears. And the way that gay men talk about the body that they are attracted to and how much they want a certain body, it's not. And I think straight men too, actually, spend a lot of time thinking about the body that they are attracted to. I think women are given less permission to be really honest about the body that they are attracted to. But I don't think if you really need a certain body to feel sexual, you're not doing anyone any favors by thinking, politically, I have to be attracted to all bodies. That's just not how desire works.
What's your Instagram again?
R text.
The letter R.
T-E-X-T. And if you want, it's very funny. But there's this we just talk about bare men for a really, really long time. And one of the things
more dick talk, apparently.
Well,
so who's gravitating towards dicks?
I guess it's me. But Honey Bouquet, which is spelled Honey Bucket, that's her drag name, was saying, I want a height, weight, proportionate man, a man who's over 6 feet tall and over 300 pounds. And I was like, oh, right, there's a whole different definition of bodies that is attractive. When you know what a bear is? Should we define that?
Oh.
So bears are what would be considered in the straight culture very large, heavy-set gay men who tend to be hairy. Otters are skinny men who are hairy. But, in queer culture, especially in male queer culture, there's so much definition of the bodies that are attractive and what you are looking for physically.
Yeah. So...
And there's all these weekends. You can go to bear weekends, which are just about spending time with the body that you are attracted to.
Yeah. So given my sense of the progression to where this question comes from, this is just my observation from outside the community, is that in the beginning, so to speak, you had a very simplistic understanding of gender and also of trans people. And I would hear about scenarios where, say, you had a straight cis guy who met a woman at a bar and then, was very attracted to her and liked her personality and thought she was beautiful and thought she was hot. And then later found out that she's trans woman. And then all bets are off for this guy, right?
Well, and it could end violently. I mean, there are so many stories where people find that a violent offense that they were somehow...
Absolutely.
And, there's...
Because it's the only way for the man to preserve his toxic masculinity, which is to go overboard with a masculine response, which is murder and violence, which is wonderful. So he will be very upset and, and there's a lot of manifestations of that. You might have conversations among cis heterosexual people that might say, or really any sexuality person who would say, well, sure, she looks attractive, but no, that's disgusting. I would, even though I'm attracted to everything I'm seeing,
right.
And the personality is exactly what the sort of thing I'm looking for, just the fact that she's trans, it's just a no-go. And when you ask these people why, they would say, well, it's just disgusting. They just think trans is disgusting, which is fucking ridiculous, right? And so they will just flat out discriminate on that level. And then, of course, just general trans discrimination, which is, from my sense, much more of a foundational problem for trans people than dating, right? Because we're
talking employment discrimination, housing.
Plus, like, trans people don't, they're not trying to trick people into dating them. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's enough people to go around. And so, but when it comes to this kind of view, it's hurtful, it's harmful, it's transphobic. So that we can point at and say, well, at least open your mind up a little bit, because it's possible that if you just weren't indoctrinated or somehow re-educated yourself not to be anti-trans, you might actually be very attracted to this person, and you're limiting yourself based on prejudice. You know, it'd be the same as if someone was indoctrinated heavily into a racist culture, like the United States, and hadn't deprogrammed themselves and just said, like, I'm not going to date a black person, or I'm not going to date an Asian person or something, you know, just because it's like, even though I'm very attracted to that person, gross. Black people are gross, you know, it's immoral, it's short-sighted, it's wrong. So then there's this backlash against that, which is, of course, understandable and justified. And then you have heading into the current phase that we're in our culture, and you have people that are starting to open up, and things are starting to change slightly, slowly. And you still have some people that are saying what you're saying, Rebecca, which is that, of course, transphobia is wrong and short-sighted and limits everybody, including the transphobic individual. But for people with their attraction, it's hard to change that exactly.
And you could be open to all kinds of bodies. So did you watch One Mississippi, the Tig Notaro show?
Her stand-up special?
No, it's a several episode.
I did watch. It's a sitcom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that show.
Yeah. So there's this. So she is heavily pursuing a woman who views herself as straight in the show, and they're wives in real life. And she. So Tig's
right. So Tig in real life is married to an actress,
right,
who is on this show, and they play different characters. Tig plays like a radio host, if I remember right. It's been a while since and her actual wife is playing a woman that she works with, I think.
Yeah, who she's very attracted to and is pursuing.
And is straight.
And the woman has a lot of problems imagining being in a gay relationship.
And wasn't in real life her wife living a straight life before?
I think so.
So it's kind of emulative of their actual beginning.
Yeah. So in the show, the pursuee asks, well, what kind of bodies are you attracted to? And Tig says, I've been with men and I've been with women. And there's this beautiful line where she says, are those saggy breasts or a saggy ball sack? And it's just kind of this very different way of looking at bodies and thinking about bodies. So is there a chance that you would get with a body that you're unfamiliar with and find ways to find it attractive? Maybe. Mm-hmm. And Tig, due to breast cancer, has had a full radical mastectomy and did not have reconstructive surgery. So, she has a body that would be not gendered as female. Like, she doesn't have breasts. Like, what does that mean? So there's all kinds of bodies out there, but we were joking, to get back to the topic du jour, is one of the reasons that this woman doesn't want to be with a transgender man is that they assume that this person won't have a penis and they can't have traditional vaginal penis penetrative sex, and is that a priority for this person?
Right. A lot of it has to do with, have you actually tried it on for size, so to speak, not actually being with someone physically, although if you're able to do that and you want to do that, then that is a worthy way to find out, right? But at the very least, investigating the indoctrination and the propaganda that you've internalized to really sift through if you're limiting yourself at the very least. And again, you could be giving into the transphobia, and it's something that each individual is on their own path around. And I don't think outsiders should shame people. And in my experience, trans people don't shame people for that. Can you identify someone on Twitter that does that sort of thing? Sure. But, every trans person I know and all the famous trans people I know would never attack someone because of their preferences regarding this thing. They'll say, if you don't want to be with me, I don't want to be with you.
Yeah.
No harm, no foul. But you might want to think about your internalization just for your own sake, because you might be missing out on things. Your soulmate might actually be passed over because of whatever prejudice, whether it's race or sexuality or class or trans or gender or whatever. You might want to investigate that, but I'm not going to shame you or yell at you for having your current preferences, that kind of thing.
And I recently had a friend who went on a disaster date, and they could not proceed sexually. What they had kind of been promised sexually, the person could not deliver day of.
What does this mean? Meaning
they were expecting to get topped sexually, and the person who said that they could be a top could not be a top.
So it wasn't an anatomy issue. It was a behavior energy issue. Yeah.
And we've had many long conversations about it, and it was really interesting because, people promise all sorts of things, right? But can they deliver and be honest about what they can actually do?
Is the implication this top liar was trying to entice the person and was lying or was convincing themselves of something?
Yeah, was convincing themselves.
And then when the time came,
could not deliver the goods.
Couldn't deliver the goods. Huh. Does that happen?
I guess so.
Huh. Yeah.
Yeah. But, intimacy is so intense, right? You get in the spot and, does your desire align with your fantasies, align with what the other person wants? We're kind of in this scary soup. And, in queer relationships, it gets so much more complicated because there's many more variables or presumed variables than, in a straight cis-bodied experience.
So is it fair for this anonymous patron who is bisexual to have someone judge her for saying that she doesn't want to date a trans person?
We live in the most judgy time that I've ever lived in, so she might get judged, but I would so much rather she be honest with herself and say, this isn't a fit for me. That would be great. Mm-hmm. Because so much better than to set someone's expectations up that intimacy is coming and for her to know that she just can't. We don't want her in that, top failure position where she gets into the situation and she's like, oh, I can't. There's no physical attraction here. I can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's related to another phenomenon that I absolutely will get behind that's related to the dating scenario that I laid out earlier. That, of course, for a lot of people, if not the majority of Americans, and certainly majority of people around the world, don't recognize that trans people exist at all.
Right. They wouldn't know it if it's... I've had that experience where somebody has told me they're a trans man, and I was like, yeah, I could spot you at 100 feet. And they're like, really? I pass in the straight world. And I was like, really? Wow. Okay.
Well, not only that, but that if they knew, whether passing or not, that someone was trans, they'd say, oh, well, you're not a real woman, that kind of thing. Or you're not a real man, whatever. And that notion is, of course, abhorrent and silly and really unscientific. And when you have people from that side of things will say, as a heterosexual man, of course I wouldn't date a trans woman because that's not a woman, that's a man. So that is wrong and abhorrent and transphobic at its most base level. Not that they have to date the person, but that they're just denying that trans people exist at all, right? Or denying that a trans woman is a woman. And for people like Anonymous Patron, that later goes on in the email and says that she thinks of herself as an ally. I don't know that, but she says she promotes pronouns and she promotes gender neutral bathrooms and gender affirming care, safe spaces. She wants to protect trans people, and she supports policies that support trans people. For someone like that is on the right side of history, do we lump this anonymous patron in with that guy I said earlier that would say that trans people aren't really trans, a trans woman is a woman? You know what I mean? Do we?
Yeah.
I feel like Twitter will lump those two people together.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much more nuance here in terms of, do I want someone to support trans rights? Yes. Do I need someone to be sexually attracted to every single human on the planet? No. I see it as really, really different. And I think, we're kind of talking about why aren't people attracted to trans bodies? And that gets very complicated. And also what I just said, you may think you're not attracted to trans bodies, but, have you ever been with a trans body?
Yeah, the thing that I would say to people, and I have to clients, is to just try it on for, like if you're dating and you're in the shoes, well, I guess I'll just speak directly to anonymous patron. In your mind, if you want to, don't do it if you don't want to, but if you want to and it's comfortable, in your mind, just try it on for size. And what comes up for you? Is it not getting my engine going? And if it's not getting your engine going, then maybe look at why. And this is for your sake, because again, you might be limiting yourself. And if you go down that road voluntarily with comfort and just exploring, you might find that further down the road, there's some flexibility there, but maybe not. Sort of like anonymous patron, I don't know, but I'm guessing a similar thing happened with bisexuality. But that one's kind of hard because in some cultural pockets, there isn't as much homophobia as there is transphobia.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And so you might find it fairly easy to try on same-sex sexuality. It might be easier. And so at the very least, just try it on for size. And at the end of that road, and I've done this work with people in a variety of areas, and I've found that for some people, they will say, you know what, I think I was giving into the propaganda. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of discomfort around just this topic in general because of all the things I've internalized and also kind of the landscape. And actually, if I just shed that, then I find that I'm actually more open and wanting to be with these sorts of people internally. And then they start to have experiences with those sorts of people and find that it's absolutely their thing, or maybe it's a secondary thing. Whereas for other people, they will find that at the end of the road, even maybe having experiences with these sorts of people, that they're like, yeah, no, I think I've shed myself of the propaganda, and I'm not opposed to it, but I've tried it on in my mind, and I've even dabbled in it in person and found that it's just not. And I'm talking about across the board, right? I'm talking about not just trans.
And we're talking about experimenting in sexuality in general. Like, we're talking about adding in sex toys. We're talking about dildos instead of dicks, or fingers instead of dicks, or like all of these things that don't get talked about a ton, but are equally valid and pleasurable forms of sexuality and intercourse. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, have you seen Monster Ball, the documentary about the basketball for guys in wheelchairs?
Like 20 years ago.
Yeah. And there's a whole section in there about penetrative sex and how important it is for folks to still be having that and how they do it. And actually, kind of the modern dildo movement, the modern silicone dildo movement was, I think they were called Scorpio. And it was invented by a Vietnam vet who wanted men who'd lost the ability to have penetrative sex to still be able to give that to their partner. And so, there's lots of people who are having sex that you may not think that the sex that we don't show. Mm-hmm. in mainstream media. But
Yeah.
there's quite a range,
Yeah.
wide range to do it, and there's quite a wide range of how to pleasure your partner and be pleasured by your partner. And so this similar scenario happened to me. It didn't happen to me, but a friend of mine wrote me who's a cis het woman and said, I was out on a date with someone before they came out to me as a trans man. And I was like, huh. And they were kind of shocked, like they should have told me sooner. But I was like, people have different levels of comfort of when they're going to tell somebody. And it was interesting. They were really shocked, and I wasn't that shocked.
Yeah. So, in a perfect world, there would be no transphobia.
Well, and the body that you think you're going to get, like I was just in Tulum, and there was this I was unexpected, but heavy-duty cis male bodybuilding culture going on. A lot of the men were like bulked up.
So this is Mexico.
I was in Mexico. Yeah, and I don't in Seattle. You don't see that a lot because it's like not warm enough to kind of like be out. You know.
Plus, it's a bunch of computer nerds.
We're not very bulked up.
Grunge music.
We're kind of a skinny, wafy. More CrossFit, less like big bodies on top. Yeah. So I'm seeing all these bodies that I don't usually see. And then I think of like, talk about erectile dysfunction. I'm like, well, if he's taking a lot of steroids, it's probably not having the best sex of his life right now. Like he's big on top, but like.
Well, who knows? I mean, we don't know, but it could be a factor.
I'm just flashing on being in like the OXO, which is equivalent to the 7-Eleven, and just, somebody's shirtless and like so buff that I can't believe it. And
you don't like it?
It was just shocking.
It's their body.
I know. It was just like weird. Like I just, I don't ever see it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not into it either, but each to their own.
Yeah. It was surprising. I wasn't expecting that culture there.
Yeah. The way that at least I had either invented or you had primed me to invent was that Tulum, Mexico, was this really relaxing hippie getaway or something. But you ended up experiencing something different, it sounds like.
Yeah. So
is that what you thought it was going to be?
It advertises itself as like a very holistic place to be.
I.e. hippie.
Hippie. It is very expensive. Yeah. And in Tulum, I did not see like a single tamale cart. Like it was just like, oh, this is for the American market. This is for the Instagram market for sure. And it was very strange. I will say we led this beautiful retreat at this beautiful set of haciendas. They were like 3 full houses.
You led the retreat.
I co-led the retreat with Drea Bloom. Yeah.
How many people came to the retreat?
There was 5 folks came. They were a great group.
And this is for what again?
This is Drea's Therapist Utero.
Huh.
So Drea led journaling prompts and all. She does, she's kind of magical. So she did her thing in the morning. I led collages in the afternoon. And we also, because we were in the jungle, we're doing all kinds of botanical prints with watercolor on watercolor paper and photographic, that really simple photographic paper that just turns from blue to white.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Stacy does that.
Yeah, I love that stuff. So we were having this magical time. And then, is it Chichen Itza? So 4 of them go to Chichen, or maybe all 5 of them on their own went to Chichen Itza, go to like one of the great spiritual pyramid sites on the planet. And then we like get to make tarot with them the next day. And they are so kind of on another plane, having seen, one of the 7 great wonders of the world. So that part was really neat, to get to be in clearly a spiritual center of the world. And then I got to do an underwater photo shoot. Did I tell you about this?
No.
So a cenote it's featured in the second Black Panther movie, which is like these water pools that are like potentially portals to other dimensions. And they're all over Tulum. And when I was researching stuff to do, I didn't need to take another ATV ride or a zip line, or like, I was just looking for something really unique. And because of my history, getting photographs of me is, a thing. And I now have so much more understanding for your wife, Stacy, and her modeling career because I did an hour and a half of an underwater photo shoot.
Oh, you were the subject.
Yes. It was the most exhausting, physically demanding.
Well, especially underwater, for crying out loud.
Yeah. So there's the main photographer and then the assistant. And the assistant spent the first 20 minutes with me just training me how to let all the air out of my lungs, how to go underwater, and how to not puff out my cheeks, which is really hard. Like, it goes against everything your body wants to do.
Totally.
And then once you're underwater, she spent another 15 minutes with me teaching me how to pose. So it's like, put your arms out, turn your head the other direction, make your legs look like a flamingo. Okay.
Do you have to keep your eyes open?
No. But it was, my shoulder hurt for like 2 days afterwards because I had just like been in this ridiculous position. But there's going to be these amazing photos of me underwater.
Did you enjoy the experience?
It was very intense. At an hour and a half, I was like, how long have I been in the water? Like, I can't do this much longer.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, my body was just so physically exhausted.
An hour and a half.
Yeah, I got out of the water. I like consumed a protein bar in like 2 bites. It was a lot. And you've been given, so I was thinking about how on America's Next Top Model, somebody cries every episode. And like, I understood why, because you're just given constant feedback. Do this, do this, do this. You almost got that right. Okay, so now do everything you just did and do this.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm really fucking tired.
Yeah, it's like ballet dancing or something because you have to always look beautiful and natural and relaxed while every single muscle in your body is doing something that you never knew you could actually do with that muscle, and hold it while your face is relaxed, but probably
you're
tense.
Not feeling
relaxed. And it's like an hour and a half, and you're exhausted. Yeah, Stacy, I mean, I don't know if she's ever done underwater, but yeah, she'll be modeling for 8 hours straight.
Ugh.
And
I have so much, I always have admired her, but now I admire her at a completely different level.
Yeah, she'll have me model for photos sometimes, like we'll do our Christmas card, or when she first started studying photography, she would have me be a subject so that she could practice. And literally like 3 minutes in, I'd be like, okay, are we done? Because she would have already taken like 10 pictures. And she'd be like, oh, honey, no, we're not even started. I'm just getting the flash right. And I'm like, okay, well, another 5 minutes. Like, how long does it take to take a couple pictures? Like, because to me, you take 30 seconds and it's to dial it in just right. Mm-hmm. Take a picture. To do like the picture that you're looking for, and that was just me often just sitting in a chair, let alone like contorting my body and having a very natural, attractive facial expression.
Well, and in the cenote photo shoot, now that I look at her other work of other people, I can see like, oh, I was in that exact same spot doing that exact same pose. Like, she knows exactly what she wants and exactly what looks good. Mm-hmm. And she is a taskmaster, which means this is why I was attracted to doing this in the first place. Her photos are exquisite. But to get there, man, it's
I've watched Stacy in action because she started doing portraits and other kinds of things, and the real magic comes in when she has families with little kids that are rambunctious, and she has these certain scouted locations like the Japanese gardens or some park, because you got to find a good place with a number of different backgrounds, and the lighting is good, and there's not a lot of public people in the background, to interfere. You don't want to bother others. So it's kind of a delicate balance. And then
that was the other thing. I was in the cenote at 8 a.m.
Right, because other people can be there, later on in the day. And also, like, the real magic comes in with her ability to coax people into providing a good picture, because she has to please everybody. She's got to please both parents and all 3 kids and maybe a dog. and she has to get them all to look at her at the same time to take the photograph. She's got to keep them all smiling. She's got to keep them in a good mood. She has to be very light and fun. And also, people are insecure. Most people are like, I think I look like shit in pictures, right? So she has to massage egos. It's a masterclass in psychological manipulation because the subjects want a good picture.
Right. And they don't know what it takes.
And, you might have like a child melting down. You might have mom that is like, my hair looks like shit. I gained weight because I had kids. God damn it. And you got dad that's like, another picture, and a dog that's getting, she's the 90% of her skill is just
the people,
is just managing that, all those personalities for like the 2 hours that it takes to take these photos. And then you see the photos once she gets them back, and everyone looks relaxed and fine. But I've been there in person, and I'm like, how is she going to get a picture out of this? This is a disaster. Like, the kid is crying half the time. The dad is like clearly not into this, what's happening. The parents seem to be kind of going through like pre-divorce fighting right now. That's like subtle. I don't know. But then you look at the picture and, everyone's beaming and smiling and looking into the camera. And sometimes she has to take 2 or 3 photos and like Photoshop one of the kid's eyes because he blinked in that moment. But, it ends up looking real great.
Well, and in this scenario, it was the photographer and an assistant. And the assistant is like, not only, she's trying to keep me not being exhausted. So like I'm holding onto a floaty. She's like pulling me around the cenote on a floaty. And
you didn't have a boat.
No.
You didn't have a boat.
No boat. No boat in the cenote.
So you're in the ocean.
No, I'm not in the ocean. I'm in a cenote, which is like a gorgeous watering hole. There's like half cave, bats flying over my head, mangroves everywhere.
Oh.
I am in
So still water.
Still water, fresh water.
So tune in to Instagram, y'all, to see that photo. Let's take a break. When we get back, more stuff to talk about. What do you say?
Yes.
All right, back from the break. So
I forgot the mic. We were chatty.
I have another email. So middle tier patron Julia from Vancouver, Canada, she says, I live in Canada, and in the past few years, there have been a few high-profile cases of famous people who were revealed to have been faking their Indigenous ancestry. Have you heard of this sort of thing?
Yes.
Of note, one was a former judge, and another was an esteemed professor. They both accepted awards and accolades that were supposed to be reserved for those with Indigenous ancestry. After investigations, it was found that these individuals had been fraudulent about their identity. Their ancestry could be traced back to European settlers only, and there was no connection whatsoever to Indigenous people or Indigenous communities. They have been accepting awards and positions in Canada that they would not have gotten otherwise. More recently, an investigation of the folk singer Buffy St. Marie came to light. She has received multiple music awards, some of which were intended explicitly for Indigenous artists. The themes of her music revolve around exploring her identity as an Indigenous person adopted into a white family, and she even wrote children's books from the perspective of an Indigenous child. She claimed that she was born on a reserve in Saskatchewan, Canada, and then adopted by Caucasian parents who lived in Massachusetts. She grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Massachusetts and then supposedly wanted to explore her Indigenous roots as an adult. However, birth records show that she was actually born to the same parents who claimed adopted her. Her family is of English and Italian descent. She is Caucasian. She seemingly grew up with no connection whatsoever to Indigenous communities, and there's no record of her supposed adoption. Some family members have said that they have received threatening letters from her lawyers to not come forward about the truth about her background as a Caucasian individual. She and several other prominent individuals have built their entire careers and identities on lies and have stolen positions and awards that were supposed to be reserved for a marginalized and highly oppressed community in Canada. These individuals also seem to follow the same pattern. They speak in interviews about the discrimination and prejudice that they experienced as Indigenous people, and even make up elaborate stories about what it was like to live on a reserve, even though none of them ever had the experience of living on a reserve and seem to be fabricating stories about experiences with oppression. Could you please speak to the psychology of these people who built their entire career and identity on lies and deception? Rebecca, answer. Why would they do this?
Why? I mean, there is a level of attention that they want that they assume can only be gotten by having an identity that they don't have. And that, first off, that makes me really sad that they would spend so much work creating a story about themselves that wasn't true. I mean, so to me, that speaks inherently to low self-esteem, that who they are isn't enough, and that these issues that they wish that they could explore, they feel that they can't explore with what is their actual identity. Mm-hmm. I mean, you hear this a lot, that like, I'm a white person, I don't have any culture. And it's like, oh, honey, like, you better work for it. You better find out what it is. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I was shocked that the Buffy St. Marie story, I mean, this has been her whole, quote, brand for 60 years. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it wasn't a judge that just happened to occasionally discuss their Indigenous ancestry. It was an artist that was centered around being an Indigenous person, right? Isn't that true?
Yes.
Yeah. Like when people thought of her, she's an Indigenous singer.
Yeah.
And sings about Indigenous things and talks about Indigenous things. And other things, of course. But yeah. So I have thought about this a lot because as a person that has a distant Japanese ancestry myself, meaning that if my parents told me I wasn't Japanese, if they just told me I was white with like some like non-standard white features, you know,
white ethnic, as my friends and I call ourselves,
yeah. Swarthy, then I wouldn't know any different. I mean, there wouldn't have been that much in my family that would have to be excised culturally for there to be no markers of Japanese culture, because my ancestors came over 120 years ago, and over time you just start to assimilate or blend in or discard because you want to fit in or whatever. And so I can kind of relate to this on some level, but
why would you claim an identity that you didn't have?
Right. So I think that it is, you know, there's a spectrum here. On one end of the spectrum, you have con artists and liars who know they're lying, and maybe over time they start to believe their lies, but they start out absolutely intending on pulling one over on people. Like we recently reran an episode about Tanya Head, who claimed to have been in the towers when they were hit by the hijackers, and became president of the survivors who were in the building association, and was perhaps the most famous survivor of the event. She claimed, I think her husband died in the building, and not only was she in the building, but she was above the impact, and she was one of the few people that actually survived after that happened. And years and years later, like 10 years later something, someone was doing a retrospective, a 10-year anniversary, I think the New York Times, and a journalist just on a very surface level started to investigate, and the entire story fell apart. She wasn't even in New York at the time. She was because she's Spanish. She was in Spain. She didn't have a husband that died, or she didn't even work in that. She never worked in the World Trade Center. There's just so many lies that were easily detected. And for Tanya Head, it looks like, given the whole scenario, that she knew she was lying. She intended to lie. She has a pattern of lying. There's evidence of that as well. And, you know, psychopathic liars will psychopathically lie. So that's on one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is people that were misled. Stacy, my wife, was told for her entire life that she had Native American in her history, in her ancestry. And what she found out with her DNA was that she has Black in her history. And there's a well understood historical phenomenon of people that don't present, you know, you imagine you're half something, you're not entirely white. And because being Black is worse than being native.
Is she Appalachian?
This branch comes from like Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas, or something.
There's whole pockets of the country where this is a huge phenomenon.
Yeah. People would claim to be native when in fact they knew they were black, but it was a lot worse to be of black ancestry than to be of native ancestry. And so, of course, even though you know it's a lie, you're going to tell your kids because you don't want them to slip with the truth because it could be bad for them. And then, after a couple generations, there's no one alive anymore that remembers the truth, and it just gets passed down. And how would you know? There are many people who are misled for various reasons. They have an aunt that just forgot. Because believe me, another aspect I've learned is that genealogy, up until DNA results could be found out fairly cheaply, is all word of mouth.
Right.
It's all just like grandpa
and that
told me that.
was the shock that I had when I did my DNA. It was like, oh my God, the family story was true. When I got it back and I was 98.6% Ashkenazi Jew, I was like, oh my God, the tribe did stay together from the 1500s. Like how that part blew me away.
Right. Because
it just seems so unbelievable that story could actually be true.
Right. Because you would think if that's what you're being told, you're like, well, I mean, there's got to be a great great grandma that got absorbed into the family that wasn't Ashkenazi. So, 100%, come on, that's probably not likely. So on one end you have the psychopathic liars, on the other end you have the people who are just completely misled. For myself, my white side, I was always told that my mom was Swedish, at least mainly Swedish. When I looked into the genealogy, my mom was only a fourth Swedish, but her 3/4 is sort of a mismatch of English, Scottish, Irish, and also those people go back to the 1600s, and there's no records of those people, so we don't really, or there's very little records, so we don't really know.
Who we remember is
the recent immigrants were the Swedes who came over in the 1800s, and we have enough, memory of those people. So my mom just always said she was Swedish. So for a long time, I said I was half Japanese, half Swedish. Am I a psychopathic liar because I was saying I was half Swedish, even though I'm only an eighth Swedish? So there's a lot of people walking around. My wife, I'm pretty sure, I know, she would walk around when she wouldn't get awards for being native, but when it came up, she might mention it. So in between, though, is I think where the vast majority of these kind of cases are, like St. Marie.
And, is this an identity that she wanted? And so she just took? Was it a fantasy? Right. Was it something that she stepped into and it really worked for her and she kept going?
Right.
And there are tribes, too, who do not do DNA testing. This is another thing, too, is that the idea of who belongs in the tribe. Some tribes don't do DNA testing and view it as very cultural about who is part of the tribe. So I don't know if that was her story, if she got accepted into a group, or if she just decided that this was her story at some point.
Well, I actually looked into her story kind of, and there's some details kind of along those lines. But to demonstrate this, since this is a psychology podcast, I want to really walk people through, because when you hear these news headlines, it is very tempting. And I see people do this when they watch reality TV as well. It's very tempting to draw this very damning conclusion. And maybe there is a damning conclusion, but it's not as simple as it was with, say, for example, Tanya Head, who clearly just made this up to get attention and then dug herself into a hole and might have thought, I shouldn't have lied about this because I'm going to get caught. I was just trying to lie to get attention for a month, but now I'm president of the association, Anyway, so I think that there's a pathway. Let me kind of describe it. So in the beginning, and I don't know, but it's possible that they might have known they were spinning the truth, and or they were maybe misinformed in the beginning. You have someone that assumed they were of native ancestry. People have said that about me in my life. They, especially when I was younger, they would say, "Oh, you're Indian or you're Native American," and say that you just thought it'd be easier to go along with it, and so you just say, "Yep," and you don't get an award or anything. You're just like, "Sure, that's I am that, because you just don't want to explain things or whatever. Or it's a job application and you're young and you're desperately trying to get a position and you're just thinking, all the jobs have turned me down. What if I just check this one box? Because some people think I look Native American. What if I check this box? Would I get the job? And you just vow to yourself that I'll check this box and I'll never talk about it again because I don't want to get into this lie. Or a person has spotty early childhood memories, like Saint Marie, I think, might have had, trauma, being taken away from your parents or something else. And the family doesn't really remember the details. And so as an individual, you're always searching for the answer. And you hear a similar story about an Indigenous person who was stripped away from their family. And you think, maybe that's what happened to me. You start having these questions. Years go by, nothing happens. Then a gig comes along that's only for Indigenous people. And you're like, well, I do remember thinking that it was possible that I might be of Indigenous ancestry. You never know. So what if I just submit it? I do pass. People sometimes, what if I put on this feather earring and just passed? And, in this moment, they know they're lying, and they have a tendency to do fibs like this anyway, but they're not committing to creating a whole career around this. They don't wake up one day and go like, I'm going to trick the world. It's just like this little slippery slope. And they take the gig and they find that, oh my God, people treat you so differently at this festival that is for this sort of thing. I'm welcomed in this community. People are complimenting me. As a musician, just trying to get a gig, no one cares about me. But as an Indigenous person who's a musician, suddenly like I'm the center of attention. Like, this isn't so bad. And then, you sprinkle in, I think what you were getting at earlier about white guilt. There's a lot of white guilt, and for good reasons. White people feel bad about their history and their ancestors having oppressed a lot of people, their own privilege. And an easy out is to start to convince yourself that maybe you're not entirely of the oppressive class. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of incentive, to say, well, I did have an aunt once that I seem to remember once saying that maybe we have Native, so we're Native. Also, as you were getting at, of white people saying that they don't have culture. They definitely have culture. They just swim in the mainstream culture, which is white culture. At Antioch, we would talk about everyone's culture. We'd go around the room, and there's a lot of white people at Antioch, and a lot of white people at the beginning of the graduate school would say, well, I'm just white. I don't have culture. So we'd have a long talk about that. Like Japanese people in Japan don't think of themselves as ethnic or having culture. They just think of themselves as they're quote unquote normal, but if they come to the United States, then they're like, oh, or if we go there, you know what I mean? It's like when you're swimming in it, you're swimming in it, American culture, American white culture isn't like the default. It's sort of like thinking your accent is
right. It's hard to admit that this is your culture. Right.
Well, also it's hard to know because you've never been educated or you've never been in a position where you have to contrast your culture. Like for myself, being Japanese American, growing up, I was constantly aware of the fact that, oh, there's this thing called culture because at home, these are things, and I go to white people's houses, it's completely different. Anyway, so after a while, some of these folks might start actually believing that they're of Indigenous ancestry because denial is a powerful thing.
Right.
You have people that drink all day, every day and say, I'm not an alcoholic. What are you talking about? I could stop at any time. Mm-hmm. It's normal to drink. I'm just drinking, I had a hard day. And they believe it. You come up to a lie detector test, they believe it. And when it comes to this sort of thing, since there's not an obvious contradiction to this, day in and day out, there's so many reasons to believe it. People believe in QAnon shit. People believe that the earth is flat. It's not a stretch to imagine that someone over time would start to actually believe 100% that they actually have an ancestry that they do not have.
Well, and we're talking about social engagement system too. So if you're getting positive feedback about this aspect of yourself, it's hard to let go of.
Yeah.
Because if you remove this, who are you left with? It's like that kind of shadow self of like, oh, I'd have to look at the part that I have been denying all this time.
Yeah. And my true identity, so to speak, is someone that I don't like because those are the people that oppressed my people or it gets very easy and there's a lot of huge incentive. Rachel Dolezal comes to mind. Do you remember her?
Yes, I was actually going to bring this up. She just got fired for having an OnlyFans page.
What do you think about that?
I mean, a girl's got to make a living.
She's a teacher's aide, I believe, and someone outed her as having an OnlyFans, and then she was fired. So she wasn't advertising her OnlyFans.
No.
She wasn't telling people at the school she had an OnlyFans. She was just doing a side gig. But if a journalist could figure out it was her, I'm guessing that she must have been showing her face. That must be part of her kind of shtick, is like, you can see Rachel Dolezal, the famous person, you can see her naked or something, And to be clear, OnlyFans isn't always naked pictures or sexual acts. It can be all sorts of things, but typically it's something along those lines. But yeah, do you think that that's like...
I mean, as a pro-sex work person, this has happened before OnlyFans. This would happen too, is that someone would get outed as a sex worker and lose their job. I mean, I think it's really unfortunate. It doesn't impact their work with children. But I do think it shows that, once you've put yourself in a position of being a, quote, liar, or, people track you. And this is happening to the Vanderpump guy. Tom. Is that, there was an article in the New York Times just the other day, like, it's the best reality TV show ever, and he's completely ruined his life. Like, once you're kind of viewed in the public eye as a certain thing, it's hard to unwind that story.
Yeah. I just watched a whole interview with him, and a year later, he hasn't grown in the least, at least from the evidence, which is really unfortunate for him. But do you think a school should fire someone over that?
I would hope not, but it's very, very common.
Yeah.
There's a case in the Berkeley Public School District, which you would think would be very accepting of a woman was outed as a social worker. I mean, as a social worker, as a sex worker.
I mean, it's kind of a social worker.
It is a kind of, and she really presented herself as like offering a human service, and she lost her job as a teacher.
Yeah. Yeah, on the surface for me, it's like, what about the children? And you're like, as long as you're not letting your kids go online to wherever they want to go, then it's behind a paywall. So
right. They're not going to
grow up. Plus, on the off chance that kids accidentally, hopefully, because hopefully they're not like, they don't have free access to like internet porn. Let's just say someone gets their hand on a picture of teacher's aide who is naked, and they start sharing the picture. Is it the end of the world? You know what I mean? It's what's bad is that you have a system that has children being exposed to pornography in general. Seeing a naked body isn't going to erode a child's mind. There's a lot of other things that are more destructive, most namely sex negativity in general, body shaming in general, right? The body is disgusting, so that's my first reaction. But then, I don't know, my second reaction is just like, Rachel Dolezal, what are you doing? Like, you're working in a school and you have an OnlyFans? Like, there's a lot of other jobs, I'm guessing, that wouldn't be as a sensitive.
So if we look at Rachel's psychology, I mean, she posed as Black for employment, for attention. She really felt like that was her identity. Yeah,
she tanned or used makeup to make her skin. Right. She's a blonde-eyed. She's a blue-eyed blonde white person, like just white. If you see early pictures of her as a teen, she's a blonde, blue-eyed white girl. You see these pictures of her when she's essentially black-facing. She's permed her hair. She's dyed her hair. She has fairly dark skin compared to her probably natural skin. I don't know, but it looks very tan and make-upped or something. And in Spokane, Washington, by the way, and becomes the NAACP chapter president out there, the regional president. Did you know that?
Yes.
And she was a professor of Africana Studies at Eastern Washington University. And then when she was caught, she just said, well, I identify as black. Another person that posed as another white person, by the way. I mean, that's another thing about this.
Right,
you don't have black people
right.
or Asians. You have white people that are claiming to be of a marginalized identity and becoming major spokespeople and leaders. I mean, it doesn't get more colonizing than that, right? It's just another example of a long history of white people just invading every fucking aspect, including marginalized groups. It's like you invade our country, you kill us, you take our children away from us, and then you dress up in our clothes and claim to be us, and then go on stage and get our awards and sing, quote unquote, our songs and claim you are the leader of us within us. You know, in the past, you would have just come in and said, I'm your white savior. Now you're saying you're one of us. Like, just leave us alone. You've already marginalized us. Let us be marginalized. Don't come into our marginalized corner. You know, it's
well, and you get to
aggravating.
come in and take it off. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the thing about Buffy St. Marie is that she never took it off. You know, I mean, she's now in her 80s and claimed this identity for an entire lifetime. I mean, what is she saying back?
Well, so there's been a lot of back and forth that I've heard reporting of, and, you know, at first denials, then once the evidence became pretty clear, her and, I don't know, maybe her spokespeople, I can't remember, I'm a little foggy on the details because it's a while since I read all this, but kind of like Rachel Dolezal, where it's just like, well, I am this, and it doesn't matter what my history is. Also, there's some, I guess, debatable points about the truth of the matter, you know, what exactly did happen and didn't happen in terms of adoption, this kind of thing. According to a news article that I read, the descendants of the Native American, the First Nation, the Indigenous people are defending Buffy St. Marie, saying in a statement, quote, "We claim her as a member of our family, and all of our family members are from the Piapot First Nation." I don't know how to pronounce that, Piapot. "To us, that holds far more weight than any paper documentation or colonial record keeping ever could."
Right, did she live the life?
Yeah, it's hard to know what they mean by that, because they could mean, well, we believe her, or they could mean, well, we don't know. It's possible that she isn't actually DNA-wise of our people, but we claim her as one of our people, which I can see, because, you know, for, I don't know, 50 years, you have this figure that you love, that fights for you, that makes you feel better, that gives you someone to rally around. You know, she's not the only one, of course, but, you know, one of the figures. And what is the meaning of life? Does it matter where she comes from? You know, it's a philosophical question, right? So, you know, I don't blame the Indigenous people for just saying, look, we still claim her, and that's that. And I'm sure it's not all of those individuals, but at least the spokespeople, that's what they're saying.
So would you say at its base, it's a low self-esteem issue?
Yeah, it could be. It could be a con artist thing as well. You know, it's sort of like Bob Dylan. There was this persona that he had, that he was this rough and tumble traveler of the American South with his 6-string strapped to his back and, you know, just going from town to town, you know. And it's like, oh, he's from Minnesota.
Yeah, he's a nice Jewish boy from Minnesota.
And grew up middle class. And
yeah, went to Jewish summer camp with my mom.
Oh, really? Funny. And had a regular...
Little Bobby Zimmerman.
Yeah. Is that like Rachel Dolezal? It's not a good thing. Now, I just want to say off the top, my thing is don't lie.
Yeah.
It's easy not to lie.
But we're also telling stories of it's hard not to lie, right? Like there are personas that we could take on that could make things easier.
Right.
And, you know, I could definitely see it in being straight. It would be so much easier for me to be straight. When I see the straight women in my life and the stability that they have, it looks really attractive. Is that an identity that I can pull off for very long? No. But do I want this is flip. Do I want the trappings of that privilege? Yes. I'm trying to think. So like an identity, like in the disability community, I have several invisible disabilities. Am I going to identify as disabled in order to, I don't know, get certain things? Like, that's really triggering for me. So I'm just trying to imagine the slippery slope.
Get what? What would you get?
I don't know. I'm trying to think. I'm not a very good person to do this with because,
well, you work for yourself.
Right.
And is this like a parking placard?
Maybe, I don't know. I'm just trying to imagine things that I would lie about in order to get ahead.
Well, is it, what you would lie about?
Yeah.
But you're saying what you would emphasize.
Right.
Out of truth, but maybe not out of a sincere, absolute need.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm trying to think of if there's any clients that I've worked with whose lives were built on a lie. Yeah, I can think of someone. And she had she could be kind of judgmental of other people who she felt like they were living a lie. And I would have to bring it up like, actually, your marriage is a lie. But it was interesting how often she would forget and how mad she would get at other people.
Yeah. Denial and then projection. Yeah. Kind of a related thing for me in my life is I've been in scenarios at the university where there would be a question of racial oppression, white supremacy, and there would be a lot of different measures in place, one of which would be to have a lot of discussions about, as professors, what should we be doing different or how do we feel about it? And sometimes they would break us up into two groups. There would be a white group and then a person of color group, a BIPOC group. And I would be in the BIPOC group because I'm half Asian. And a part of me was like, well, yeah, Asians are oppressed. I'm half white though. And I'm also fourth generation. And also Japanese people are bastards and racist against Chinese and Koreans and Vietnamese. And so I'm the victim. I don't know.
Well, and it's funny, so Jewish folks in those situations are often like, there needs to be a third group. We were just considered white in the last 50 years. Really, we're not white. I don't know if you've seen that scenario go down. And they're like, no, Jewish people, you have to be with the white people. And the Jews are like, our experience has been so different than your average white person. Yeah. But then like, has it? So, yeah.
And I have a friend who's half Asian, half Japanese, who was in a scenario like this. And she was actually told to go with the white people. And she was like, well, I kind of get that, but I'm not entirely white. So can't I maybe go back and forth between the two? I don't know. Like for half people, as always, we're like,
where do I go?
Maybe for Jewish people as well. It's just like that, because we don't fit into like the darker skin, lighter skin phenomenon, then, paradigm. It's like, we don't know what to do with you. So we'll just forget you exist and make you conform to one side of yourself anyway. So, I'd be in this BIPOC group and I'd be thinking, I don't know, but I'd rather be over here than in the white group because we're over here talking about, oh yeah, those white people. And if I was in the white group, I'd get labeled as, well, and that wasn't the purpose of these affinity groups, I think is what they're called. But for myself, I didn't push back. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't say, I don't know if this is the right configuration for this. I'm not saying I'm not oppressed and haven't experienced racism, because I have, but I'm probably not in the same category as for myself. Are there Asians that are, like there are Asians in Seattle that I think are being targeted by a lot of hate crimes, particularly in South Seattle, my anecdotal experience.
Yeah. It's been really bad, actually. Right.
So I'm not saying Asians aren't, but as a half Asian, pretty white passing person, as a man,
you're tall as fuck.
I'm tall. I'm very educated. I have so much privilege. And somehow but I didn't push back. So I think that there's that kind of thing too. I'm not lying, but if I was in a tight spot and I had a tendency to lie, maybe slightly, am I capable of going down that road? I guess. So I think that we should definitely call these people out.
Right.
But at the same time, we shouldn't tell Indigenous people you can't claim her. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that's such a specific scenario, and what she's given to that community is so huge. But what is identity? I mean, another really interesting example is Carol Channing, the famous singer. For me, a huge star in the 70s, famous for musical theater, very, very entertaining. She lived into her 90s and was beloved even then. She started to disclose at the end of her life that she was a quarter black, and how she'd made it through Hollywood. She passed all these years, right? We didn't know until the very, very end. There's stuff about identity in our culture that is so huge. Could Carol Channing have been famous in the 60s and 70s if folks knew she was a quarter black? Probably not.
Right. But yeah, Bruno Mars. I don't know, but a lot of people, anecdotally, I'll ask people, what is his race? What's his ethnicity? People say, oh, well, he's black, right? He's half fucking Asian.
Right. He's half Filipino, half Jewish, half Puerto Rican.
Well, that's three halves.
Three halves.
But he's half Filipino. And the other half,
He's a quarter Jewish, a quarter
okay.
Puerto Rican.
But he's half Asian and he's no black.
Yeah.
I don't fault people, but the way he codes is a black person. Mm-hmm. And I don't know Bruno Mars and his thing. And maybe he is a lot more vocal and will set the record straight about his ancestry. But in the United States, if you're a half Asian, quarter Jewish, quarter Puerto Rican artist, you are not going to get the attention than if you are a black artist, because Asians are not associated with R&B or soul music or dance music. Asians are associated with Chinese food and karate. So I don't know what Bruno Mars is doing exactly. I don't know. I'm not saying he's lying or anything, but you got to do what you got to do. It's just a reflection of our fucked up society.
Right. Yeah.
I have some Psychology Saddle merch for you.
Ooh.
I got you 2 shirts.
Nice.
It occurred to me that the co-hosts don't have merch. You don't have to wear it if you don't want to.
I mean, of course I'll wear it.
But there's a
take care of yourself.
Take care of yourself shirt, and then a Psychology in Seattle shirt, and a Psychology in Seattle mug.
Oh my God. I'm like surrounded by merch.
Yeah.
Look at that. I'm branded.
You're part of the team. You're part of the brand.
This is one of the greatest gifts of my life, to be part of this team. I feel lucky every day.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people are like, oh, what do you do? And one of the things I say is, I'm a monthly guest on a wildly popular international...
You're not a guest, you're a co-host.
I'm a co-host.
You're an employee.
I'm a monthly co-host on a wildly popular, internationally known podcast. I mean, whose life story is that? Like, that's pretty, I feel very blessed to be in this scenario.
We're blessed to have you. I'm blessed to have you as a friend. And I always look forward to you coming over. And
I took a shower for you. That's how much I want to impress you. It's always fun. It's always interesting. There's always a lot of banter. You and I, as podcasters, have... each of the co-hosts, it's a different kind of energy, obviously, really different. And for you and me, it always feels the most like a conversation, most like hanging out. Right. I think of we used to go out to lunch and have this exact same experience, and now we record it. And that's really funny. And very much modern life. I have the same experience. I'm going to hang out with one of my besties. We'll talk about really provocative stuff. We'll record it, and then we'll put it out to the universe. That's kind of cool. Mm-hmm. And I'm 53. This is not I'm getting to participate in modern life. I'm not playing Sudoku. I'm not doing pickleball, but I am podcasting. And we gotta say that we figured out what the creepy noise was. Someone was correct. We're gonna take a picture of it right now. It was the lightsaber that you made at Disneyland.
Yep.
That was the creepy noise. It was not in the heating vent as originally.
I've been dealing with this noise for years, ever since I guess for the 3 years or 2 years, ever since I got that lightsaber. And it's like a ventriloquist, because the lightsaber's to my left when I'm at my desk. It always sounded like it was coming from directly behind me.
Well, it's a very strange noise.
Yeah.
It's like a real noise.
And I was tearing apart my shelf every 6 months when that noise happened. The time it happened with you, it was starting to happen more often because it's a battery indication.
Oh,
then
telling you the battery's out?
It's low, which is kind of annoying. It's just like, how about if it just turns off? Don't take a picture of.
No, I'm trying to take a picture of me with
with the lightsaber. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You're doing a selfie. And I also tore apart my wall heater because when it went off with you, I figured it must be the wall heater. And by the way, the wall heater is not close.
Right.
It's in the ballpark, but why was I so sure it was the wall heater? Yeah, I tore that whole thing apart, and I'm like, there's no battery in this thing. It has a dedicated supply.
This is a horrible photo.
And by the way, it's like the supply to the wall heater is 240, and for you electric people out there, like that's not a fun thing to mess around with. I didn't even hit the breaker. But once I figured it out, I went online and discovered that there are a lot of people in that situation where they're like, oh my God, I heard this noise going off. Because normally when something tells you the battery is going dead,
it goes like beep beep
or a light will blink or something.
Right.
It won't just every 6 months.
Because God forbid your lightsaber doesn't act when you need it to.
That's the thing. Like, it's just a fucking toy. Like, if the batteries die out and I didn't know, it's not the end of the world. It's like, it's programmed in to like bug you. Come on. Yeah, I can't think of I have a lot of things in this room that are battery powered, and that's the only one that's annoying like that.
Well, is it because it was so expensive?
I think an engineer didn't ask the question about, well, I could do this, but should I do it? That's like engineers, they can do all sorts of shit, like we could change the Google Maps interface. We could change the way Facebook interacts. We could change the UI of all sorts of things, but should we?
So I had this happen. I got a new iPad mini for travel to watch movies when I was traveling, and it was great, but I thought, oh, this will be fun. If I'm having a video conversation with someone, I can have this bigger screen. I can see their face so much bigger. But when I'm podcasting with Sylvia, I could use it with her. But there's a super annoying feature that the camera in the thing decides what it should be focusing on. So you can't position yourself. The camera zooms in on your face. So it's assuming that you're moving around willy-nilly and the camera should decide. But it's super annoying because if you're talking to someone and you move, you get this weird, it's this weird AI camera thing. So I had to spend like a very long time going through all the settings, learning how to shut that off. Because I was like, I don't need you to frame the shot.
Yeah.
I'm very experienced at this. I know what I want the shot to look like.
It's like my car. It's constantly telling me to slam on the brakes. There's this
beeping at you and the red light.
Well, and the steering wheel will start to shake.
Oh shit!
And it'll start to slightly tap the brakes for me.
Oh god!
It thinks I'm about to slam headlong into a car in the opposite lane, and I'm just driving down Aurora.
Right.
And I'm not swerving. There's nothing that's happening, but the computer somehow thinks regularly that I'm going to slam, and it's like there's no option, and I've looked, to turn that feature off. You can only turn down the sensitivity, and it's still too sensitive.
We should ask, if we should have Eli on, we should ask about this, because Eli also informed me that if your car suddenly surges, that information gets recorded.
Right.
And that so this is a great story. Eli had to inform somebody that someone else was driving the car and the car had been in an accident and repaired without the driver of the car knowing. A family member had done this. And they were like, how do you know? And they were like, because we can see this report online from your car.
My God.
Your car surged at this point. There was an accident. And the person was like, what? They were like, this has all been recorded, sir. I'm sorry I have to inform you.
Wow. You can do it, but should you do it?
Right. Well, on that note,
you can and should take care of yourself because
you know what? On my way here, the cherry blossoms were blooming, and I thought, oh my God, it's spring. There's 5 Mondays until the official start of spring. So by the time this podcast airs, there'll be 1 Monday. Hang in there, everybody.